The University of Success is Mandino's handbook for achieving what you want in your life, for actually getting the goals you desire and living the dreams you dream. The book is a curriculum of sorts. It's a course comprised of 10 semesters with a series of lessons making up the coursework. We've been moving through this book, Mandino's University of Success. We're in the first semester of this book, University of Success, and today is lesson 4 of 5. And today's lesson is called How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms. So get out your pen and paper, grab the book if you have it, Mandino's University of Success, and prepare yourself, brothers and sisters, because we're going to do some work today. This is a workshop. Today's lesson 4, How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms, comes to us from Dorothea Brande, Brande, and her book Wake Up and Live, which was published in 1936. During the very depths of the Depression, my parents were born in 1935. So this book was published in 1936. Dorothea Brande kicks off her teaching with this guiding thought, quote, "There are seeds of self-destruction in all of us that will bear only unhappiness if allowed to grow. There are seeds of self-destruction in all of us that will bear only unhappiness if allowed to grow." Dorothea Brande. So the question becomes, what toxic seeds, what seeds of self-destruction, as Dorothea Brande puts it, what toxic seeds are growing along with us? These are those seeds, those parasites, fungi, bacteria, infections, viruses, if you will, that are self-destructive, that are sabotaging our upward growth, development, and spiritual expansion. This will remind some of you of the inner saboteur, universal archetype that we all, to some degree, possess. And I want to start unpacking this lesson with the conclusions that Dorothea Brande draws in this work, Wake Up and Live, and then we can drill down on the specifics of how she arrived at these thoughts. Conclusion number 1. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. That's her first conclusion. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. Now, I would note here that the will to live is also known to us as the survival instinct. We've all heard that, the survival instinct. We all have that. That's the will to live. So there's that. That's the first conclusion. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. Conclusion number 2. We are victims to a will to fail. Conclusion number 3. Unless we see this in time and take action against it, we die without accomplishing our intentions. Unless we see this in time and take action against it, we die without accomplishing our intentions. Conclusion number 4. This is the last one. There is a way of counteracting that will to fail, which gives results that seem like magic. There is a way of counteracting that will to fail, which gives results that seem like magic. So those are Dorothea Brande's conclusions from her book, Wake Up and Live, which is the basis for today's University of Success lesson 4, which is called How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms. Page 26, Mandino's University of Success. Dorothea Brande writes, "We first experience and then later turn to realize the process of growth in ourselves. The individual emerges from childhood into adolescence, from adolescence into maturity, and at each of these crises, we find that the activities and interests of the old period are being replaced by those of the new. That nature is preparing the organism for its new role in the world, is actually reconciling us to the new demands on us by showing us pleasures and rewards in the oncoming state, which will replace those we must abandon. But the idea of another will, a counterbalancing will, the will to fail, the will to death, is not so readily accepted." Let's get into that. She writes on page 27, "Death is as much a fact of experience as birth and growth. And if nature prepares us for each new phase of life, by closing off old desires and opening new vistas, it does not seem too difficult to think that we are always being slowly, gently reconciled to our eventual relinquishment of all we hold dear as living creatures, and withdrawal from struggle. Now we're getting into the meat of what the will to fail is. Withdrawal from struggle, abandonment of effort, releasing of desire and ambition would be normal movements in an organism which was being gently wooed away from its preoccupation with life. It is for this reason that we are entitled to look upon the will to fail as a reality. Now, these are examples. This is what a will to fail looks like in your life. Now, if inertia, underline inertia, timorousness, also known as nervousness. If inertia, timorousness, substitute activity, effortless effort, quiescence, and resignation were found only at the end of life or when we were drained by sickness or fatigue, if they never handicapped us when we should be in the full flood of our vital powers, there would be no reason at all for attacking this will to fail as if it were, as indeed it is, the arch enemy of all that is good and effective in us. But when it appears in youth or full maturity, it is as symptomatic of something wrong, deeply, internally wrong with one's life as untimely drowsiness is symptomatic of ordinary bodily ill health. Inertia, nervousness, substitute activity, effortless effort, quiescence, resignation. Let me read on a little more. In youth, we seldom recognize the symptoms in ourselves. We explain our reluctance to getting started as the natural timidity of the tyro, but the reluctance stays. The years go, and we wake in dismay to find that what once was a charming, youthful diffidence in us is now something quite different, sickly, and repellent. Or we find a convenient domestic situation to bear the brunt of excusing us for never having got to work in earnest. We could not leave this or that relative lonely and defenseless. Then the family grows, scatters, and we are left alone. The substitute activity at which we had been so busy is taken remorselessly away from us, and we are sick and terrified at the idea of turning back to take up the long abandoned plans. Now, what she's saying here, if it's not quite plain to you, is that when we're young, we get distracted by certain things. Most of the time, it's a good job, making good money. You can buy a car, you can buy a house, you can buy clothes. You get lulled into comfort. You start a family, you fall in love, and you get lulled into that stream of comfort and pleasure until the boo is gone, or the divorce comes, or the kids are out of the house, or the job ends, and you wake up one day and realize that what you really wanted to become, what you really wanted to do, hasn't happened. That's what she's saying right there. And what she's saying is that there are things that were operating all along that caused you to fail at becoming what you really wanted to do. And it's that list of things that I mentioned earlier. Inertia, nervousness, substitute activity. That's a big one for a lot of us. Substitute activity, quiescence, resignation, resigning yourself to your current position in life or station in life and not pushing through to move forward to become something greater. That's what she's talking about. So let's move forward. Page 28, Dorothea Brande writes in Mandino's University of Success, lesson number 4, how to recognize your failure symptoms that are causing you to fail in your life right now. She writes, most of us are under the necessity of choosing between work and starvation. And the employment we were able to find when it was imperative that we should begin earning is not work for which we are ideally suited. When marriage and the raising of a family have been undertaken, the necessity is all the more urgent. We might be willing to wait through a few thin years if no one but ourselves would suffer. But to ask others to do so takes more selfishness and more courage than most of us can muster. One reason why America, the much vaunted land of opportunity, can show so many men and women of middle age wasting themselves in drudgery, filling positions which bring them no joy, and looking forward to a future which at its happiest promises years of monotony, and at its worst, the nightmare of poverty-ridden unemployment. This necessity to fall upon the first work we can find is alone enough to explain why so few of us ever managed to bring our plans to fruition. Often, at first, we have a firm intention of not losing sight of our real goal. In spite of the fact that we must make a living at uncongenial work, we plan to keep an eye on our ambitions and to work at them by hook or crook, evenings, weekends, on vacations. But the 9-to-5 work is tiring and exacting. It takes superhuman strength of character to go on working alone when the rest of the world is at play, and when we have never had any evidence that we should be successful if we continued anyway. And so without realizing it, we are swept into the current of the will to fail. We are still moving, and we do not see that our motion is downstream. That's true, brothers and sisters. That's true. Here's what she says on page 28. This is very important. Most of us disguise our failure in public. We disguise it most successfully from ourselves. It is not hard to ignore the fact that we are doing much less than we are able to do. Very little of what we had planned, even modestly, to accomplish before a certain age, and never probably all that we had hoped. How many of us have said, I'm gonna do this by the time I'm 25. I'm gonna have this by the time I'm 30. By the time I'm 35, I wanna do this, this, and this. And by the time I'm 40, I'm gonna be here doing this. These arbitrary deadlines that we give ourselves that are based in age and reaching certain milestones. Yes. And we don't do it. We don't get there. We goal set, but we don't goal get. We make the list, we chart the age, we write down the outcome, but we don't actually get it. We set it, but we don't get it. And that's because there is operating, according to Dorothea Brande, and I do endorse this thought, there is a subtle, invisible, yet very active will to fail at work in your life. Here's what she writes on page 29. In the 50s, and sometimes earlier, it is usually safe enough to do a little disarming and semi-humorous grumbling. After all, few of our contemporaries are in a position to say, why can't you start now? And yet some of the greatest work in the world, many of the world's irreplaceable masterpieces, were done by men and women well past what we too superficially consider their prime. So we slip through the world without making our contribution, without discovering all that there was in us to do, without using the most minute fraction of our abilities, either native or acquired. If we manage to be fairly comfortable, to get some respect and admiration, a taste of, quote, a little brief authority, end quote, and some love, we think we have made a good bargain. We acquiesce in the will to fail. We even pride ourselves on our shrewdness, not suspecting how badly we have been cheated, that we have settled for the compensations of death, not the rewards of life. She writes, we suddenly wonder why we are running about like this, how we happen to be playing away at hide and seek as if our lives depended on it. What became of the real life we meant to lead while we have been off doing nothing or busy at work that provides us with no more than our bread and butter? Now, for a lot of people, brothers and sisters, it takes some time, possibly years, for them to get to a place where they realize that all they're really getting from their work is money, which allows them to buy things. It takes a time for many people to get to the end of satisfaction with the things before you awaken to the emptiness that they've caused. It takes time for people. And some people never get there, ever. Some people never get there. The things and the comfort and the pleasure lull them into a permanent state of sleepwalking. Many people